Hi there, I'm Michael Stennett with the Antique Piano Shop, and today I'm here to talk about the pianos that we restored for the Grand Ole Opry. In May of 2010, Nashville, Tennessee was hit with torrential rains and had catastrophic flooding. There were billions and billions of dollars in damages. I remember watching the news on television and thinking how horrible it was to see that kind of devastation, and how the waters were inching up close to the roof of the Ryman Auditorium. And I remember thinking how sad it was to see that much of musical history underwater and at risk of washing away and being lost forever. I remember hearing my colleagues talking about all of the instruments at the Opry that were lost. There was Roy Acuff's string collection that was an irreplaceable part of Nashville's history. A lot of the famous country music singers lost their equipment and their instruments as well. It was substantial. Not only was it a financial loss, but these were instruments that people were close to, that they felt connected with, pieces that they preferred to play over any other, and there they were floating away during the storm. A few months later, Steve Gibson, who is the musical director at the Grand Ole Opry, came to my shop and was looking at some of the Steinway pianos that we had here that we had restored. Steve told me about 3 instruments at the Opry that had been found after the floods and were in pieces and covered with mold sitting in a warehouse. He showed me pictures of these pianos, and although they were almost all complete, there were pieces that floated off during the flood. Piano legs, piano benches, and piano lids, and they had never been recovered, but the core of the pianos were still there. When Steve visited our shop, he really liked what he saw, and he asked me if we would be willing to restore these pianos that were so important to the history of the Grand Ole Opry. No one else was willing to restore the pianos for the Grand Ole Opry because of the substantial amount of water damage they had received. After the pianos were rescued from the flood, they were put in a warehouse where they attempted to dry them out. And unfortunately, the pianos grew excessive amounts of mold, and that was a real chore to remove. It would have been a lot easier just to buy brand new pianos, but it was important to restore these irreplaceable pieces of our musical past. Both of these pianos you see here are Steinway Model Bs. The Steinway Model B is considered one of the most desirable concert quality grand pianos ever to have been built. This Steinway B was built in 1925. And 1925 was also the same year that the Grand Ole Opry had their very first radio broadcast. This Steinway B was built in 1947. One of the highlights of this whole project, though, was that the Grand Ole Opry found the very piano that Richard Nixon played when he visited the Opry in 1974. It's the 1909 Steinway Vertigrand upright piano you see behind me. The Opry tells me that they had not realized that this piano was still in their inventory, but when the flood happened and they found the piano, they were able to trace it back using the serial number and realize how important this piano was and that it was still part of the Opry's property. Of all the pianos that we have restored at the Antique Piano Shop, this project was definitely the most challenging and the most time-consuming. When we restored these pianos, we literally had to take them down and do a frame-off restoration. The most important part of the restoration was probably the mold removal, because these pianos were just covered in mold. We were able to restore the original cast iron harps, put a new automotive paint finish on them. We were able to save and restore the cabinets themselves after they were dried out and glued back together. Literally every aspect of the pianos had to be reworked. There wasn't a single part of these pianos that was untouched. One of the most difficult parts of the restoration process was getting the black finish just right on these pianos. These pianos are actually sprayed in black lacquer, and like an automobile that's been wrecked, it's nearly impossible to get a damaged undersurface to look smooth and perfect. Both of the Steinway concert grands were restored using a historically accurate black lacquer finish. However, the upright piano was left with its original black lacquer finish so that it would look aged and imperfect, just as it did when President Nixon played it in 1974. The reason that I personally decided to agree to undertake the project of restoring the Grand Ole Opry pianos was because I feel so passionate about restoring these irreplaceable parts of America's musical history. When I first got these pianos in my shop, my breath was taken away because I sat back and I thought about all of the amazing greats that had sat and played these pianos. To be able to have restored these pianos and be able to sit down and play the same keys that President Nixon played, that Jerry Lee Lewis has played, Elvis Presley, Roy Acuff, and all the other greats, it's something that you just can't put into words. It's so amazing and so wonderful, and the gratification far exceeds anything monetary we could have ever gained. This really was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Here at the Antique Piano Shop, we definitely restored the unrestorable.